Okay, I believe we are recording, I think. This is sig-aws. It is July 14th. Happy Bastille Day. And welcome to everyone. I think we have one item on the agenda so far. I don't know if anyone wants to do a hello before we get started or whether we should just get right into it.
You do hello.
Okay. I'll say hello first. Hi, I'm Justin. I'm one of the sig-aws leads, also do a lot of work on COPS. And yeah.
Cool.
That's Rob at Red Hat, new on the sig-aws space and going across multiple clusters providers.
This is Ken from Heptio. Joe Beta couldn't make it today. He asked me to kind of just check in to see what's going on, so I'm going to try to relay anything to him. So.
Cool.
Chris Hine, partner solutions architect at AWS.
My name is Luis Pavon, and I worked at CoreOS.
I'm Seth Pollack. I work at Been Verified.
Very cool. I think that's everyone. So if there's nothing else, let's get into the agenda. So I think the first item on the agenda is about making the cluster ID tag, I guess, required. So Rob, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, so we in OpenShift ran into issues where we were running multiple clusters under a user account in their own VPCs, and storage instances or storage stuff was getting created in locations that didn't have any execute nodes, any kubelets running that could access the storage. We kind of tracked it down when we found out that we were installing the clusters without any cluster ID tags, any of the Kubernetes cluster tag. And we had thought that being isolated to its own VPC would handle that, but it appears it's not. And certainly looking in the code, it looks like at best you can get isolation on an availability zone per user, possibly even one cluster per user, without possibly having issues like this. So I kind of wanted to bring up, the cluster ID seems pretty critical if you're going to be ever running more than one cluster in AWS. And it kind of seems to make sense to just make it a required field, period, in Kubernetes. If you're going to run it in AWS, you need to have this set, even if it's only a single cluster.
Yeah, I'll speak to some of the history here, which is originally the tag didn't exist at all. And it turns out that you need this tag to differentiate different clusters running in the same account, really.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, certainly without the tags, things don't work very well. And there are, for example, not tagging your subnets, for example, will also cause problems with some cloud providers. So definitely tagging is highly, highly recommended.
Yeah, we ran into the same issue with the AWS quick start we made with the ELB not being able to find. They weren't able to find out which subnet to create ELBs in. If you think things weren't properly tagged, it's definitely a problem.
There is and so I think the only reason that we would not make it mandatory is because it isn't, if we were to start from zero today, I think we would make it mandatory across the board. The issue is that making it mandatory in theory breaks anyone's cluster that doesn't have those tags set, even if really they should have them set.
Yeah. And Justin, you had suggested making kind of like a backwards compatibility flag, which I think is kind of a good way to go about it. Make it required with a easy flag to just, say legacy mode or something like that.
Yeah. So that's sort of what we've done in the past, where we've made sort of bigger breaking changes, is to have a flag which people can set. And possibly we can debate the exact sequence of of whether it defaults true or defaults false and all those things over the various releases in accordance with the deprecation policy. But basically, start off with it being easy to fix and like at some point we make it so that users have to do something simple and that gets their cluster working again. And then like in the next release, if they haven't done that, if they haven't tagged in this case, then it would be an error and there would be no option. There's a meta thing here, which is like the reason why. So in this case, it was determining the zones in which your cluster is running to create a volume. In the Heptio case, it was the ELBs is determining the subnets, which is actually a little bit more complicated because of the way subnets work with ELBs. But the sort of root cause of both of them is that the cloud provider doesn't currently have, or didn't originally have, access to the nodes, for example. And if we had access to the list of nodes, we could probably infer these things a lot more smarter. And that is another one. But I think in 1.6, someone changed load balancers to accept a list of nodes, whereas previously they just accepted a list of node names. And that was it helps us a lot if we do that, because in the node is a lot of extra information. For example, the AWS instance ID is in there. The AEZ is in there. All this information is in there in a way that is much nicer and more reliable. So I think a separate thing that we are also working on is to make the nodes, to have the cloud provider gain access to the nodes generally and use the nodes as more of a source of truth rather than having to go back to AWS all the time, which will make this less of an issue. But I think that the deprecation flag is a good idea if anyone has any. So in other words, the proposal would be we make it required, the cluster name tag and maybe some other tags would be required in 1.8, let's say. And so everyone's cluster that did not have, if you have the tag, no problem. If you don't have the tag, your cluster will fail to start. But the workaround is simply to add a flag, a single flag, like legacy tags equals true or something like that. And then your cluster will continue to work, but there will be a heavy warning that you should add those tags to your cluster and let us know if you can't add those tags to your cluster, because the legacy flag will go away in either 1.9 or 1.10.
Speaking of legacy, I have the 1.7 source checked out and just looking at the tagging the AWS provider, and it's const tag name Kubernetes cluster legacy is Kubernetes cluster is the value. So yeah, I think in the quick start we're already doing one level of legacy by naming the tag wrong. I just now realized that this is a problem. So
yeah, there's two different tags there.
Yeah. So the original one was Kubernetes cluster, I believe.
Yeah. Capital K, capital C. Yep.
The problem with that is it doesn't allow for subnets, for example, to be shared because you can only have one tag with the same name. So then the new ones are kubernetes.io/cluster/cluster name. And then you can say equals shared or equals owned to have some notion of ownership. But the idea is then you can have two clusters that are sharing a subnet. The level 2 legacy is that I've been told that Terraform can't currently create key tags with slashes in them or something like that. Or something like dynamic. There's some dynamic issue with dynamic Terraform tags that means that people are not entirely happy about that new form either. So the beat goes on. But
all right.
But yes, that is why we have, so also like it would be better to prefix the tags with our Kubernetes.io name anyway, so that but yeah, I think we could certainly have, it would be nice. I think it would be nice. It is a good suggestion to mandate the new flags, the new tags as well.
Yeah.
That would be great.
I mean, you could mandate one or the other. Say one of these has to exist on there until there is a direction on what the final tag should actually be.
That's fair enough. Yeah, I think that's true.
People aren't
Yeah.
happy.
And it is a sort of an implementation issue in Terraform, so I don't imagine that. I imagine that at some stage they will address that. I'm not sure we should necessarily jump through hoops for every tool or the Terraform.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I'd be in favor of that. I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts or objections. So the proposal would be that it would, for now at least, that the flag would, the legacy in 1.8, let's say, that having a tag, either legacy or v2, will be required. But if you pass a flag to, I guess, kube controller manager, I don't know if we need to enforce it across the board, but just kube controller manager, then it will. Well, actually, I don't know if that's possible. If you pass a flag, it will ignore that check and allow you to continue for a limited period of time, presumably 1.8 and maybe 1.9.
Are people going to be looking at the output of the API controller, or is this going to be visible?
It will fail to start, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, what I mean is in the period of transition where we're going to warn about it, are people going to see it?
Well, I think
I think that's what Justin was suggesting is by default, the flag would require the cluster. So the first time you upgrade and you try to run it, it's going to error out. And there would be a flag that you can set to run it in the old mode, but you're going to have to acknowledge the issue.
I see. Because,
I mean, part of the issue is that exactly what you just said, where we are logging. I think it was only an info and it's now been upgraded to I can't remember if it's an error or warning, but people didn't notice it. And it is, like, I regularly miss those warnings.
Do you have a PR for that yet, or a documentation for that yet?
For which one? For the
cluster ID required? I just want to make sure that.
I don't think there is one. I think that's what we're discussing here, is whether we agree with the idea, because it's a breaking change. So, I mean, the other option is just to make it required and not even have a legacy flag. If people are like, how hard is it to just tag? But I feel like it's not trivial to just tag. So.
Yeah, for a cluster with significant amount of resources that may have been spun up, that could be a big endeavor.
How much more work is it to tag the cluster ID than it is to set the flag?
It would be significantly more work to set the cluster tag, in my mind, than to set the option on whatever daemons would need it. Because you have to go find, your load balancers, your nodes, your persistent volumes, whatever else that your cluster has used and created, and tag everything.
I do think you raise a good point. And I don't know how hard. I mean, I guess we'd only actually make the instances. The instance would be the only one we would error out on.
Yeah.
I guess the issue is if there's someone out there who, for whatever reason, can't tag their instance with the Kubernetes cluster, we would have no out unless we gave them the flag. But I do agree. I suspect it wouldn't be too hard to
Where's the flag placed?
On the instance. You pass a tag Kubernetes cluster equals that or whatever. Okay. And then what you typically do is if you're running an auto scaling group, you tag it on the auto scaling group with like a pass down magic.
So maybe we can suggest that we can warn that this is coming. We can suggest that you definitely tag it the correct way. But if you really want, it's up to you. It's like you can shoot yourself in the foot, and then you say you can put this label on it, but you're on your own.
I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense, and I think also that if we say that if you have to use this. If you have to use this flag, let us know why you are using this flag, because we'll deprecate it immediately from the start. So we'll start the clock on turning off that flag, and
yeah,
I think that's reasonable.
We can get more opinions on the flag. I think it definitely once the document's created. So.
Yeah. I mean,
sounds fine with me.
Yeah, Rob, are you going to do a PR or?
Yeah, proposal.
Just a pull request, I think. Do we need? Okay. Well, I guess we need an issue which sort of just describes what the issue is and what our proposed agreed solution is, because everything has to have an issue. And then I don't think it needs a full design. I don't know.
No, it shouldn't. Other than the fact that it's a breaking change, but I think probably the PR is fine. Yeah, I'll write up a PR.
Yeah, and I think a breaking change with the flag is sufficient.
Is there a formal process in Kubernetes for breaking things like that, so that it gets documented and release noted correctly?
I think that's it. I think there probably should be more, but I think that technically there is a deprecation policy. So I don't know if this would actually be a breach of our deprecation policy. It's odd. It's an odd one. We could ask, I don't know, whoever the release manager is, or we can ask the architecture people, or I don't even know who we would ask.
Okay, I can ask. I know there's a couple of people at CoreOS, part of SIG PM, SIG release. We can ask. So I can just ask on the side. Just curious.
Cool. Thank you. So that's great. I don't know if anyone else put anything else on the agenda or has anything else they want to talk about.
I just have a question for Rob, really, on the disappearing nodes. And because I saw that myself, and I was wondering if any status changes from last time he mentioned it.
There's been some discussion on the PR.
Mm-hmm.
I think largely I'm kind of waiting for the creation of the SIG cloud so that we can bring it up. So really, it's something that all the cloud providers need to kind of weigh in on, and we need to have kind of guidance on it.
Okay.
There's been some discussion, but there's lots of different ideas, but nothing heading yet towards a conclusion. And I think we might need to have the overall working group or SIG or whatever they're going to end up calling it, doing it with it, whatever, to kind of decide how to move forward on it. Make sure we get enough people with buy-in, right, from the cloud providers. Because I don't think we got like AWS has kind of chimed in, and I believe I think OpenStack has, and some volume guys have kind of chimed in, but I don't think like Azure or any of the other cloud providers have really chimed in and looked at it.
Okay.
We can try to figure out what our AWS, what we think, if it was only AWS, what we think the right policy would be. And I think the question, do you want to restate the problem, or shall I restate it, Rob?
Sure, yeah, I can restate it. So the issue is that, at least for AWS, when an instance is stopped in AWS, it is removed from Kubernetes. So any pods that are running on it get rescheduled and all that kind of stuff. And then if you restart the instance, obviously it comes back up, joins the cloud, and it has all of its data on it. In other cloud providers, there's some others that when you stop the instance, it just becomes not available and it stays in Kubernetes. So really the core question is kind of around what determines a new node. Since when you start an instance, it's going to have a lot of things that are already in common with the instance that was stopped in Kubernetes.
Yeah, and there are ways, there are changes you can make to an AWS stopped instance. Like I believe you can change the instance type. Is that correct?
That's a good question. I think you can. I think you might be able to change the instance type at one point.
I don't know if that one doesn't really concern me, because if a node has more CPU or RAM, right, it will if kubelet,
not a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, kubelet should treat that like a hot plug, which apparently happens in the real world, that someone might hot plug in more RAM or something. So kubelet should be able to update the node status, and in theory, everything should just work. I'm sure, or I suspect it won't just work out of the box, but I don't think that's a guiding concern, because that would just be a straightforward bug. I think or new behavior that we need to accommodate. I think where it gets interesting is like with volumes, like local volumes, I think are the more problematic, or the ones we really need to think about in terms of like, local volumes are new. And I guess like if I have a local volume on a node and I stopped it, like, do I want to bring it back with the same node ID so that the same local volumes persist, or whatever the logic is there, I think will be a guiding one. I don't know what other cases.
Can an instance be stopped without the administrator knowing? Can it be stopped without from AWS instead of from the API? And then that situation never happened?
I suspect it can be. I imagine that like.
Because my biggest concern is that as a Kubernetes user, that they look at the like the UI or the output and they say, oh, my nodes are ready. Everything's happy, right? So, and he's just losing nodes slowly, right? And it's such a phantom thing that it's scary to So that I wish there was a way to say, look, I knew about this and it's no longer there. That's what I would like to see.
I think that's a good point. I think that though there's like a general like what is it like, the idea of like that nodes on AWS are also very ephemeral, right? And I'd love to see us integrate or continue our integration with the cluster autoscaler more, so that
sure
the notion of nodes doesn't really matter as much anymore in my mind. But I guess an interesting question is like why do people stop nodes? Like what is the use case? I imagine that there are circumstances in which, like, if AWS detects a compromise, maybe they'll stop one of your nodes, right? Honestly, I don't know. But
maybe they're in a region or an availability zone is no longer available. So what would happen then?
I think they get terminated. I don't know.
Terminated? But looking at, let's say I only look at the Kubernetes screen. I don't ever look at AWS, right? Because I trust the Kubernetes screen, right? Then if a region goes down or something happens to the cloud, and those nodes go down, what does my Kubernetes screen show?
If the nodes are terminated, then the nodes will disappear. Sorry, if the instances are terminated, the nodes will disappear.
Yeah, but so everything says ready, right?
Yeah, say ready.
That's the problem. That to me, it sounds like it shouldn't be happening, right? Because from a Kubernetes point of view, as a view of the status of my clusters of thousands of things, it should tell me that something has happened, some state change has happened which I didn't expect, right? That's my suggestion.
There is a separate notion of health when it comes to things that, like, I want to, if EBS volumes can't be scheduled, right? EBS volumes are the classic, like, what does it matter if an AZ goes down? Well, EBS volumes are like the big one.
Yeah.
There's, if you only are running in one AZ, that's a problem. Like if you're down from 3 to 1, that's a problem. But the most likely one is you're down from 3 AZs to 2 AZs, and half or a third of your EBS volumes are not mounting.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that, I guess you see that in your stateful sets.
You will see a whole bunch of pending containers.
Yeah, you'll see exactly.
But at least there's a state change. They're not saying running, and that's what I'm like. If that said running and they're actually not running, or they just got removed completely, like stateful sets just were gone, then that would be bad.
The nodes are gone. The pods will be gone. The stateful set will bring up a new pod and will fail to schedule.
Yeah, exactly. That's like the symptom of something that we could know easily, because we knew that there was a node there, and then something had to actually remove it from the database, right?
Isn't there a difference between an instance that has been stopped by the user that's different from there's an issue in AWS and a zone is not responding, right? So I would imagine that within Kubernetes, the AWS controller is not going to, if it loses contact with an AZ for whatever reason, it's not going to suddenly mark all of those nodes as deleted, would it? That doesn't make sense to me.
There are 3 states, I guess. There's an instance can be terminated, right, which is when AWS or the user shut it down forever. There's stopped, which is a sort of temporary suspension, but you're not charged for it. Nothing is actually running. It's just sort of, it remembers the configuration. AWS remembers the configuration and can restart it. And that's why I believe you can change instance types. And then the third case is something has gone wrong with the control plane and you can't reach an AZ. And a number of years ago, I remember seeing like AWS instances would just disappear from the described instance list in that situation. And I believe it's fixed. The mitigation against that is that, so what will currently happen is those nodes would be deleted because Kubernetes would say, I have no knowledge of these nodes. The mitigation against that is if like more than some fraction of your nodes disappear at once, I think we don't evict, we don't delete the nodes. I believe that's what I think happens, but honestly, I think we saw this actually like 2 years ago in Europe somewhere as well. But yeah, it's certainly a scary edge case. I mean, your nodes on AWS or the cloud are supposed to be ephemeral, so they should. I don't know. That's where I think that's where this might well be a SIG cloud discussion, which is like, what is the notion of a node, and should we, under what circumstances should we alert when you don't have nodes, for example, in an AZ or don't have.
It's an existential question. What is a node, man?
When does a node change its identity? Like,
Rob, do you mind adding that PR or documentation to the notes from today? That way,
Sure.
we'll know what they are. Just so I, keep track of it. But I mean, I'll tell you how I got to it. I was doing a demo of a cluster FS on top of on AWS, and I was trying to show how if I take one AZ down, that the part's still running, and when I shut it down, everything's still set ready, and everybody's like, "Yeah, what's the problem?" So I was like, "No, I shut down a whole bunch of nodes. I trust me, I did."
So that was actually what kind of spawned it. Is that we had a customer that had that kind of a thing. They had a system that they were trying to use to monitor the nodes in Kubernetes and querying Kubernetes, and they had nodes go down or get stopped or whatever, and they disappeared. So they could never monitor when a node had an issue, right? Because from Kubernetes perspective, it just stopped existing.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely an existential question, because like also what happens if you never launch nodes in one of your 3 AZs, right? That is just as bad, but.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree the current situation is.
There's improvement to be had here. It's just unclear what the improvement is.
Yes, and I think it might be a general cluster health. We have the node problem detector now. Maybe it's like the cluster problem detector, which is, half your or a third of your nodes, or you just don't have any coverage in this AZ, or you only are in a single AZ, or every single pod is on one node, for example. Like those sort of things would be warnings that
every single pod's on one node.
Exactly. Well, we come across that with like kubedns, right? Where we have that can happen today. It is very unlikely that it can happen, and it's risky.
Yeah.
So there are all these sort of meta health checks that are, and it sounds like this was an attempt by your customer user, Rob, to build a monitoring system to do meta health checks that went a bit awry because of the way Kubernetes says, yes, all my ready nodes are ready and happy.
Exactly right. It was something they tried to do, and it didn't work out very well. But it kind of brought up this kind of, when digging into it and looking at what was going on, it kind of brought up this question of, okay, we've got these inconsistencies across cloud providers. So now what do we, in order to come up with any consistency, we need to figure out what a node is and what determines a new node and all of this before we can determine, and before we can start saying, okay, all cloud providers need to act this way, because how do we know what's correct?
Yeah. And I think I would like to ask the opposite question, which is, when is a AWS node marked as not ready in Kubernetes?
So the not ready status is purely determined by the heartbeat from the kubelet to the API server.
Yeah, so think it would be marked not ready. Because see, what the issue is right now, when you do a describe instances, it's filtering only on active. So I believe it would become not ready if your instance stays active, but the kubelet stops reporting in for X number of status checks. So I think it ends up being like 40 seconds or something like that.
So
Continuous 40 seconds or something. If it stops reporting in for that period of time, then it would be marked not ready.
so it would have to be some type of network or the kubelet is not running issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kubelet is crashed. Kubelet is not, yeah. Kubelet's hung or networking issue of some kind, I think.
I've seen it when the disk gets full, like so logs can't be written, kubelet will crash,
Yeah.
will cause that not ready. You can also sometimes, depending on how long your instance takes to boots up, sometimes it will respond as not ready when it's rebooting.
Okay, so then the ready not ready is that the instance checking the instance it is started in the AWS, but it is not responding. So that's the not ready.
Yes.
Yeah, not ready though is entirely ready and not ready is entirely done by the kubelet and the kubelet heartbeats. It's entirely Kubernetes concept. But what we have in addition on AWS is, and all clouds, most clouds, is we have a list of instances, and if it disappears or if it is not running on AWS in the describe instance list, then we will delete the node, and that is the node controller in kube controller manager.
Okay. Okay.
And just for my own sanity, what's the purpose of removing a stopped instance from the node list?
I can tell you the purpose of removing a terminated instance, which is you want it to go away so that you don't have to wait for the readiness. You don't have to wait for
The heartbeat.
Yeah, you don't have to wait for the heartbeat to mark the node is down and for all of that to happen.
Yeah, makes sense.
Stopped, I think, was just an edge case that was basically overlooked. Or I overlooked it. And it's, I mean, the node isn't running, so you do want to reschedule, probably. I guess the other question is, why are you stopping your node, right? Like,
yeah. There are still, I mean, we've kind of had the discussions on the PR, right? There's the, I guess you could say, like the old way of doing IT, the newer way of doing IT, and older ways, even though their cloud instances still very, very well prefer to take down an instance and to upgrade it or something like that, and not have it get removed from Kubernetes and that kind of a thing.
It's not necessarily an old new split either. I mean, like there's situations where if I was running locally or something like that, and I was on-prem and I wanted to shut down machines because to save power or something like that, then I would imagine a node being stopped is a totally legitimate state.
True.
It does rejoin when it comes back, and I guess then the
Right.
question is, like, am I a new
That's
node?
the scary part.
Yeah.
Well, you definitely don't want you don't want it to like continue running the pods that it was running when it was when it was stopped.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Absolutely.
I think this might well verge into, say, cloud territory. I think it seems like the answer is we don't really know. We don't have a strong answer for what AWS should do.
Correct.
We can certainly, if it's pressing, we can certainly like do a feature flag type thing to change the behavior. It may be that if we have some form of cluster health monitoring system, then we negate we sidestep the problem. I don't know.
What does Prometheus do? I guess that's the question.
I don't think Prometheus.
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Well, I can certainly say that from my side, the original issue that caused this crisis in identity has kind of gone away. So it doesn't appear to be an issue, I guess, now with the customer. I don't know what they did, but the issue got closed out. But I did just bring up the inconsistency between the cloud providers, because GCE and Azure do not work this way. GCE and Azure are both, when an instance is stopped, it just becomes not ready in Kubernetes. So that's what.
But it makes sense. I mean, I'm looking at the code right now and I'm seeing there's only 3 states for a node phase, which is pending, running, and terminated. Would it make sense for Kubernetes to learn a concept of a stopped node? And the AWS would just clearly do that. And then other cloud providers don't have a concept of stopped, so they would put it right in terminated.
So stop. You were saying that a Kubernetes node would have that's interesting.
Right, because I really think on-prem, that's a legitimate thing. If I want to bin pack all my pods and shut down some machines and then power them on later, and I want to have the automation to do that, I should be able to express that to Kubernetes that these nodes are stopped, but just for now.
Yeah,
right.
I'm all for that.
I think that then gets us into sig node, doesn't it?
Right. We can just make somebody else deal with the problem.
That's what a sig is good for. We pass the buck around.
Should I create an issue for this in Kubernetes to get some discussion going on that?
About the notion of a stop node? I think that would
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and then you can link it to this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great idea because if it turns out that like bare metal like pops up and says, oh yeah, we really need this notion, it's really painful, then that adds a lot of support to the notion that we should have it.
I doubt it's painful. It's really like it's kind of a contrived scenario a little bit, but it's still probably worth expressing. It's especially because if we're in a situation where we need to reconcile the behavior of different cloud providers and try to force them into the same bucket when it's really not the same thing, and this would be a nice flexible way of fixing that. So, yeah, I'll start on that.
I mean, the key thing really is to not disappear. So just don't disappear.
Yeah.
Okay. If we have time for another topic, one thing I wanted to bring up really quick was that with the 1.7.1 release that just came out, kubeadm now learns a node name flag, which is important. We were having issues with 1.7 on our quick start, where nodes would join trying to advertise their short node name without the fully qualified DNS. And some other part of Kubernetes, and then the details escape me right now, but some other part of Kubernetes was anticipating that the pre-allocated node was going to have the long FQDN. They weren't agreeing with each other. And to disambiguate it for Amazon's case, because I guess this was hitting everybody that was trying to use AWS with kubeadm and 1.7, I think. They added a node name field where you could just specify what you wanted to name the node for kubeadm for both init and for join. So we're going to be doing that in Heptio's end. We're going to be setting that flag, and I think that maybe COPS might want to have some of these. I don't know if COPS is suffering from the same problem or what, but.
Well, so the do you then set the hostname override flag on Kubit? Is that where it goes to?
I think that might be what it's doing underneath. That might be what kubeadm is actually doing underneath. So
So COPS has done that before, but what we had literally this morning is kubeproxy also has a similar flag and also complains about the same thing. And there's a PR which is going to make it a serious problem if they don't match. So we're also doing that in kubeproxy. This is a long-standing issue where the root of this is it used to be that the node name had to be resolvable from the master and was how the master reached the kubelets.
Yeah.
That is now fixed with some flags. You can set the resolution order for how the master or the API server, I think it's the API server, how the API server talks to the kubelets. And if you prioritize the internal IPs, then basically everything works as you would imagine it should have always worked. And the node name doesn't really matter anymore other than they have to match. But I would love to see a better node name. So the other problem with the other problem with the node name, and this might tie into the previous conversation, being the IP or being the host name, is that the host name is not unique on a cluster. So
interesting.
It will be the same, I think, if you stop a node, but if you have a small subnet and you reset instances rapidly or start new instances rapidly, you will rapidly reuse an internal IP address and you will get the exact same node name, which is... In turn, that leads to all sorts of problems where when I try to introduce caching, like it turns out I can't use the node name as the cache key because it isn't unique. Pardon
my ignorance on AWS in particular, but is there a DNS technique where you can use an instance ID dot something and get? I guess that really doesn't work that way, right? Because an instance doesn't just have one IP address.
There is not. there is not a way to do that, sadly.
Yeah.
It would be great if there was. You can publish DNS records from the instance ID.
Yeah.
But it is not built in.
Okay. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to use FQDNs everywhere for our node names and just hope that works. Cross our fingers. So.
Yeah, I would love at some point to get the node name being the database instance ID, but I've also had feedback that people like it being the longer FQDN so they can like map it to an internal IP, even though it's the internal IP and not the external IP.
Mm-hmm.
Like people do like that as well. So we solved the immediate. There are other problems here, which is like if you have a custom domain name or DHCP domain name in your VPC, I think that's correct. You get into all sorts of problems, but which is another reason why it's so frustrating or so complicated to deal with this. But I think for now we've got all the problems fixed, and we'll probably just live with it.
Yep.
But yeah, I'd love at some point to get a better node name, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
All right, thanks.
Don't know if anyone else has anything. Is anyone trying 1.7 out of interest with bigger clusters, like more than 200 nodes? Because I know we had some bugs which we fixed pretty late in the 1.7 release cycle on that.
I wouldn't mind trying it out. I don't have 200 nodes though.
Yeah, it is 200 where it goes, where it was hitting a pagination limit or a limit on the number of filters you could have actually. But anyway, those bugs should be fixed, but it certainly hasn't had the coverage that we would like to have on it yet. So any feedback will be very welcome if anyone has that.
Do you have a PR or something for that?
It's already merged.
I mean, like at least you can read it, so I know where to look for the problem.
I'll try to find it.
Is that merged and out in 1.7.1?
1.7.0.
So I'm sorry. So I'm just trying to ask. The problem was in 1.6 or the problem was in 1.7?
The problem was in any version prior to 1.7.
Got it. Thank you.
I'm not going to say which alpha or betas it may have got into, but 1.7.0 includes the fix and 1.6 does not. I think it may have been backported, but I'm going to find I'll put an issue in the notes. Well, if no one else has anything else,
I'm all set.
All right.
it is happy Friday to everyone.
Yep.
All right.
Have a good weekend, all.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.